Today's guest is on a mission to make invisible labor visible. She is a working mom of 4, although I think she'd also argue that all moms are constantly working, and has become a strong voice for millions of women's lived experience. Although researchers have been studying these topics, no one seems to be talking about them. So she has started some honest, real conversations about the mental load thrust upon women and mothers, weaponized incompetence, an equitable division of labor, and so much more. Please welcome to the podcast, Paige Connell, aka She's a Page Turner.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I'm so excited to dig in, but let's start with kind of your own personal journey of motherhood and marriage and what kind of inspired you to start sharing this content.
Sure. So I have been married to my husband for, 8 years now, but we've been together since I was 16, which is why I've kind of lost count. It's been almost 20 years we've been together. And so, yeah, we've spent our life together, really. I've been with my husband for the majority of my life, and we became parents about 5.5 years ago. And our journey to parenthood was not the typical journey. We actually were foster parents first, and we were foster parents and then ultimately ended up adopting our 2 oldest children through foster care, and then welcomed our 2 youngest children actually through IVF, because after adopting our kids, I went through some fertility issues and reproductive health things. And so we became parents really quickly to 2 toddlers, and then had our 2 biological children shortly after. So we went from no kids to 4 kids in about 3.5 years, which was a lot. And during this time, there was also a global pandemic. And so, when I talk about marriage and gender equity and all of these things, oftentimes there's this narrative online about kind of picking the right guy and like, how did you not know he wasn't going to do his fair share? And like, weren't you prepared for motherhood? And I think
it also puts all the onus on us.
On women, yes. Yeah. But I think it also ignores the fact that nobody can truly prepare for what parenthood is going to look like. And we are kind of fighting upstream against so many different societal expectations and norms that exist outside of our homes as well as in them, right? And so my husband and I had an incredibly equitable partnership, and then we had kids. And then there was a global pandemic, and I worked from home and he worked outside of the home. And it just became incredibly unbalanced very quickly. And I feel like one day I just kind of woke up and like looked around and had no idea how I ended up in this life, and I wasn't happy. And when I started sharing about this, my husband and I started working through this. And after like 6 months of working through this, I started sharing online, not just about this, but about a bunch of other things as it pertains to being a working parent. Mm-hmm. And I found that so many women were in a very similar position. And the number one thing I would hear was, thank you so much for articulating this. I didn't know why I felt this way. And that is exactly how I felt when I was in the thick of it, which was like, I know I'm upset. I know I'm frustrated. I know I'm resentful, and I don't know why. I can't put my finger on exactly what it is. And that's really what I'm trying to do with my platform is, allow people to be able to articulate what it is they're going through, whether it's at home or at work with the motherhood penalty or struggling with the cost of childcare. There's so many things that we're combating as parents and working parents and women that it can be so hard to figure out which one to kind of like butt up against at which time.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I feel like the pandemic was that perfect storm, that like pressure cooker on so many things in our society. Yeah. But so many women were then, forced to homeschool their kids while also working or
totally
all the things. Well, can you share a little bit about like what working through that with your husband looked like? I'm sure many conversations, but I'm sure kind of hearing that perspective could be helpful to other people.
So it wasn't graceful at first, right? It probably looked similar to what a lot of couples have experienced, which is, he would say he was going to empty the dishwasher and then he'd forget. And then I had to empty the dishwasher, but I had the 4 kids by myself. And then I'd get mad at him about the dishwasher and we'd have a fight about the dishwasher. And we'd both leave being like, okay, well, this fight is clearly not about the dishwasher, but we don't know how to have this larger conversation or like what's going on. And so we had that fight 1,000 times. It felt like over years, right? We were constantly like talking about how to share the work of our home. And my husband was like, I'm always here. What do you, I'm always here. I'm always at bedtime. I'm always at dinner time. Like, what else do you want? I'm here. And I couldn't say the words like mental load or invisible labor. Like I couldn't say any of that. And so we were
sick of it. It's like, I don't know what I need. I just need something.
Yeah. And I think when I really hit a breaking point, I think I was 2 months postpartum. So I was in this postpartum fog, part of my life. And what really was the catalyst for change for us was I was listening to a podcast that I always listen to, and Eve Rodsky was a guest. I think she was promoting her book Fair Play. And she started to use these words like mental load and domestic labor and gender equity. And I was like, what is she like? This is mind blowing. Like all the things she's saying is what I'm experiencing. And it really was this aha moment for me. And so I bought the book, And I just started learning. I just started learning about all of these things. And through learning about them, I was able to start articulating to my husband what it was that I was struggling with, what it was that I felt was holding not just me back, but our entire family back. And so we were able to start having these conversations in a much more productive way. That is not to say that we didn't go through what everyone else goes through, which is having to have this conversation repeatedly. My husband maybe getting defensive at times or feeling shame or, yeah, really pushing back on some of these things. And doing the fair play game, which is like a card game, really helped us start to kind of shift the actual work. There's like the domestic labor of it all. And then there's the like societal expectations and gender norms. And that takes so much more to work through. So we started with what we could work on, which is like becoming equitable in our home with our time and with our efforts and with our labor. And then over the last 2.5 years, we've been breaking down all the other aspects of that, right? And like what it means to be a good dad and a good mom and a good partner. And how do we form those viewpoints outside of what society expects of us as people? That's taken a lot longer. But I will also say this is an ongoing conversation. We're always going to be talking about this because as parents, life is crazy. And so you always have to be talking about these things.
And your kids are changing and like their needs are changing. So that day to day might kind of start to shift. So how do you adjust your relationship so you don't end up back where you started?
Yeah.
Okay, let's dig in a little bit more to like what these buzzwords mean. Right? Because I feel like a lot of women, maybe they've started to hear it because they've been graced with a TikTok of yours, or there are more people talking about it, you know, here and there. But if they're just in the thick of it, or maybe they're a new mom and they're experiencing that frustration that you are experiencing. So let's back it up a little bit. Let's talk about the like mental load, that invisible labor. What are some of the things? I mean, like right now it's the holiday season, so you could probably go off about like a whole laundry list of what that invisible labor is. But what is some of that invisible labor? And like, how do you start to make it more visible?
So I think there's two parts, right? There's the mental load and there's invisible labor. And I actually think about them as two separate things. And so the mental load for me is kind of the mental checklist or to-do list in your brain of all the things you need to know, do, remember, plan for. And so I actually oftentimes can't keep it all in my brain because there's just too much. And so I use like my reminders app on my iPhone, right? And if I'm looking at it right now, it's like, don't forget tomorrow's sports day at school. Buy a housewarming gift for our friends who just bought a new house. Don't forget tomorrow's gym class for your daughter. She needs spring sneakers. Bring a gift to the speech therapist today because you're not going to see her before the holidays. This is my running checklist. I have 10 plus tasks just this afternoon on this running to-do list, right? And so it's this mental work, this thing that is not like tangible. You can't hold it, but it takes up our brain space. It's even like dinner. You're not just thinking about cooking dinner. You're thinking about what in the fridge needs to be made. What's going to go well with that? Have my kids have it in a protein? Or are they eating this vegetable? Should I give them a fruit? Who's getting iron? Who doesn't have fiber? What do we need to add to the grocery list because we just used all the cheese? You're just constantly thinking about all of the things. And the thing about this never-ending to-do list in your brain is that it's truly never ending. Every time you check something off, you add 4 or 5 more things to it. And so this mental labor, this mental load goes along with everything that we do. And everybody has this. This is not unique to parents. This is not unique to marriage. I like to talk about like with your siblings. Who's the person who's thinking about the gift for mom on Mother's Day and texting everybody? And who's the person picking it up, right? And who's the one saying, hey, we have a card, please sign it. That is the person who's
the oldest daughter. That's
the eldest daughter. Exactly. Yes. But so that's the thing, right? There's mental load with everything. We have it at work, we have it at home, we have it with our friends. Think about the friendship groups you have. There's always like one person who's coordinating everything and like reminding all the friends. And so that's mental load. When I think about invisible labor, sometimes invisible labor is actually something we can see. It's just going unacknowledged and it's not valued, right? I think about the laundry, for example. I do the laundry every day because I work from home. So I have a real system over here. We have 4 kids, 2 adults, a dog. One
you have to have a system.
Yeah, we have one person a day. Like everybody has an assigned day for laundry and then Fridays sheets, right? And then my husband and I just do our own laundry when we need to. And so that is how I keep it moving. My husband, in theory, because he works outside the home, could come home every single day, walk into a kid's closet, see a bunch of clean clothes, and never know when that happened.
Yeah, the laundry fairy.
And because he doesn't see it, because it's invisible to him and it actually doesn't provide quote unquote value to him, he just gets to reap the rewards of my work that goes unacknowledged and is not valued. And so that's the invisible labor, the stuff that happens behind the scenes or in the shadows that people don't acknowledge and or don't place a lot of value on. How much work is it to make lunch every single day? It can't be that much work to make lunch every single day for your kids. But it is, right? And the result of that is that your kids are well fed every single day at school and they have somebody thinking about whether or not they had a well-balanced meal. when I think about invisible labor, oftentimes it's that work, the work that is actually happening, the wrapping of gifts, the picking up of gift cards for teachers at the holidays.
Yeah.
Who's doing that? Who's doing that? Because it doesn't just happen, right? And so just because you don't physically see it with your eyes doesn't mean it's not happening. It does not mean it's not important. But so often women bear the brunt of this invisible labor and it's often unpaid. And that's the big difference between what men are known for, which is their paid labor. And most women that we know, the majority of women are also working for pay. So, they're doing that plus all of the invisible labor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like that is probably why these conversations are now happening, where it breaks my heart to think of like the generations and generations of really unseen and unheard women who did it all and never talked about it because it's just what was expected of them, and kind of like suffered silently, which is why I'm so glad and I'm so proud that we're having this conversation now. But I feel like so often, women mostly are, working outside of the home as well, because one, how do you pay for anything if you don't have incomes these days, especially in Massachusetts? So like how did you start to implement systems that didn't put so much ownership onto you? Because I think so often you hear, well, if you made me a list, I would do it. Well, that's a whole other task to add to my reminder of like, okay, make him a list, think of all the things. So is that, reminder like a shared note between the two of you, or do you own certain things like you kind of just mentioned? Obviously every couple is going to be different, but what seems to be working for you?
Yeah, so that's the thing. I think every single couple is different and they're all going to have a different solution that works for them. For me, our starting point, like I mentioned, was that Fair Play game by Eve Rodsky. And I turned it into an Excel spreadsheet because for me, that just made more sense. I couldn't handle a card game. I wanted to see the numbers. I wanted to see it. And
then, it makes it visible.
Exactly. And like the cards make it visible too, but I knew that like I wanted to be able to go back and reference it and say like, no, you put your name down for this thing. Okay. So you're accountable to it. And a big part of Fair Play, which I don't think is a perfect solution, but I do think it's a really great starting point, is that once you are assigned a task or you kind of raise your hand for a task, say we're talking about cooking dinner, you have to own what she calls like the CPE of it all, the concept, planning, and execution. So you're not just cooking dinner, right? My husband cooks dinner every night, but for a really long time, he would come into my office and say, what do you want me to make for dinner? And so every single night I had to think of what to make for dinner. I had to go look in the fridge and the pantry. And I was like, what the, you said you were cooking dinner, then just cook dinner. Like stop asking.
Like the task.
Own the task. So that's part of it. Like you own everything that has to do with that task. The entire task. A big part of Fair Play is not like sharing tasks. In my home, we do share certain tasks because that's just how we operate. And that's why I say it's not a perfect system, but you can figure out what works for you. Some people love a good app. There's tons of apps out there that you can try that help you manage your home, and they all have different strong points. Some do a lot of meal planning. Some do really great calendar management. Like what works? I think a shared calendar is so incredibly important. I don't do this, but some people do a shared email, and they use that one email for all school correspondence, and both parents are getting that email every single day. So it's not just going to mom or dad, it's going to everybody. And so, there's all these ways you can start to do this, but I think there's like the domestic labor of it all, kind of finding equity there, making sure we're all doing our fair share based on, and again, equity, not equal, right? It's never going to be 50-50, but like I work from home, so I do all the laundry every single day. And that's possible because I'm physically here. But if I worked at an office, that division of labor would probably change. So we talk about those tasks, but then we also, in my home at least, we talk about time. My husband gets home at 3:30 every day, and our kids are in daycare or at after school. They don't get home till 5:30. He gets 2 hours to work out, lounge about, sometimes do a chore here and there. Maybe he'll mow the lawn one day, but like 2 hours of uninterrupted time, not working by himself. And I used to say to him, hey, you're not here in the mornings, because he leaves very early in the mornings. So from 6:30 in the morning to 9 a.m., I'm on kid duty. I get home at 9 o'clock in the morning and I am immediately working. I work all day long, and in between my work calls, I'm folding laundry, I'm making kids lunches, I'm trying to eat lunch myself. And the second my workday ends, those kids walk in the door. So I don't get a minute, not a commute, not a second to myself ever. And so we had to talk about that because there was an unequal division of time. He had more time to rest or work out or to go see his friends or to do whatever. And I had none of that. And that is the case for a lot of women. There's a leisure gap. There's a fitness gap. And so I think there's multiple buckets of this conversation, which is you can talk about the actual work that is required to run your home, but that's only going to solve a piece of it. You have to also talk about your time. And do we actually have time equity? And again, that's going to look different for everyone based on whether or not you have childcare or who works outside the home or inside the home, who travels for work. But what does that look like? And how do we try really hard to make it fair?
Yeah. And I think that's such a good place to start. I mean, wow, what a concept, just having a conversation. But really, like, okay, what do you want your marriage to look like? What do you want your life to look like? And I think so often, we run towards these life checklists of, I need to get the ring, I need to have the wedding, I need to have kids because I need to be a mom. And we never stop to think, like, what do I actually want from this? Like, what do I actually want this to look like? And how meaningful can that really be? I do want to back up a little bit and talk about, because you mentioned working in the home. And I know on your TikTok you shared recently that you were laid off, which started a whole slew of conversations in your comment section of, great, get rid of the childcare. Great, you can, now you can just do everything at home and you can be in charge of everything. Like, you don't need to be worrying about all of this anymore. And I would love to hear how this little shift in your, not little, large shift in your day-to-day, how does that shifted your day-to-day in the home? Because so many people are probably like, wow, you probably have so much free time now. Now you're the one lounging about for 2 hours when, like, we know that's not the case.
Yeah. So for some context, I'd been working a corporate job. I'd worked at the same place for about 10 years. And then I started doing content about 2.5 years ago, or 2 years ago, actually, only 2 years. And content was just for fun. And then it became a job. And then it became a pretty substantial job. And I was working all day long and all night long. I was working until 11 o'clock every night on my computer while I was sitting next to my husband pretending to watch a TV show, right? Like, I was going. And because I had the more flexible job, even with my corporate job, it was more flexible. My days were so disjointed, right? I would take a Zoom call and then drive a kid to a doctor's appointment and then come home and take another call, answer some emails, hop on a podcast, do this, right? I was just running around like crazy and really burning the candle at both ends. And so when I got let go, I too was like, you know what, this will be nice. Except for nothing's really changed. I no longer have the Zoom calls for work and I no longer have a boss. I am now self-employed and I'm probably still working 10-hour days, creating content, doing things like podcasts, answering emails, like all the things, right? I'm still doing quite a lot of work. The difference is I have a ton of flexibility because I'm my own boss. And so when I go to speech therapy with my daughter, I don't actually have to worry about whether or not I'm available on Slack. If I'm not available on Slack, it's okay. I no longer have that stressor. And I no longer have the stress that so many working parents have, which is such a luxury of, I was telling you before we started this call, my family had the stomach bug last week and I had to cancel everything for 4 days, which was a huge bummer. I had to miss a conference I was supposed to volunteer at and cancel a lot of calls and push a lot of work. But I didn't have a boss to answer to. I didn't miss out on my pay. I didn't have to use my PTO. I didn't have to stress about any of that. So there's some luxury in that. So I want to acknowledge that privilege. But I am just as busy today as I was 8 weeks ago before I got laid off. I am just as busy because the work of managing 4 children and a home while being employed there's a ton of work, which is why so many stay-at-home moms are like, what do you think I'm doing all day? I'm exhausted. I'm doing the laundry. I'm making lunches. I'm taking the dog to the vet. I'm taking this kid to a doctor's appointment. This kid has the stomach bug. It is never ending. It is truly never ending, the amount of work that goes on in a home. And so what I've learned is, there's this trend online of trad wife life. And
that's what I was going to ask.
There's this promise, right, to women that if you just leave the corporate job, you don't have to be a girl boss. If you just leave the corporate world, you're going to be happier. You're going to be so much happier. You're going to have so much more time for yourself. And what I've learned is you just don't. And even if you took away my content job, I would still be incredibly busy. And if you took away my childcare, because I have childcare because I'm still working, if you took away my childcare, I'd be incredibly busy and I would still have no time for myself because if I needed to go to a doctor's appointment, who's watching my children? If I have one kid with a stomach bug and the other kid with an ear infection, how am I navigating that? What supports do I have? And when I inevitably get sick, who helps me? No one, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, well, in my home, my husband would take a sick day. But, in theory, like in this conversation, who's doing that, right? It is still just as much work. And I've learned because I had this view of once I don't have this corporate job, life is going to be so much easier. I'll be living on easy street. And then it's just not the case. I am
totally
just as tired and busy as I ever was.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, I feel like we also tell ourselves these kinds of things too, of like, listen,
Yeah.
it's 2 more weeks and then this job is going to slow down. We're in the clear. And then
Yeah.
it's like, you're saying that every couple of weeks. But
Totally.
it is so true of it's painting this trad wife trend is like painting this like beautiful picture of this soft life, like no more chaos. You're just at home. You're just making some sourdough bread all day, feeding the chickens. Like,
Yeah.
no, 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 no. And it also doesn't show like the danger of that, of this spot that you're putting yourself in, completely relying on another person. Also, yeah, like you were saying, having literally no time for yourself.
Yeah.
If anything, I would say your life will be more chaotic in a different way.
Yeah, it's just different, right? You're no longer working within those systems of having to have a job and a boss and all of those things, but still busy. And oftentimes, these people are homeschooling their kids or whatever that might look like, right? And that's a ton of work too. Caring for kids full time is a lot of work. Educating children is a lot of work. That's why teachers are there and should be paid much more than they're paid. So I just think, yeah, it's this promise of it's a false promise. And to your point, it also completely ignores the financial implications. You're not going to have a retirement account. You're not going to have a safety net financially. Oftentimes, if you wanted to leave, you can't.
Yeah.
Because where are you going to go? And if something, God forbid, something happens to your husband and he passes away or something, or gets injured at work, how are you supporting your family when you've left the workforce? Because unfortunately, our country doesn't value women after they've left the workforce. We essentially set them back to zero. It's like you're starting over in your career. It ignores that whole component as well, that there's so many unexpected things that can happen in our lives, in our world. And this is not to say you shouldn't be a stay-at-home mom. It's just if you're going to be a stay-at-home mom, you have to have those financial safety nets in place to protect yourself and to be able to potentially re-enter the workforce if you need to. And it's just not something that's talked about in this conversation, which is just like, become a stay-at-home mom, your life will be so much better. And it totally ignores the other factors.
Yeah, 100%. And it is unsurprising that now, as this trad wife trend progresses, people such as Ballerina Farms are now popping up in like evangelical magazine covers. And,
Totally.
Politics is a big part of this conversation too. I mean, it encompasses so many things like our reproductive rights and our ability to choose what we want our life and our family to look like, childcare and our lack of support there.
Yeah.
Our lack of paid leave when we have a child. Like, we're not really given these systems to start a productive family, yet that's all they want us to do.
And women tend to do the bulk of caregiving. So when we talk about things like paid leave too, it's not just about childcare. It's caring for aging parents, caring for a sick loved one. There's so many reasons that people become caregivers in our country. And again, mostly women take on that responsibility, but it happens for so many reasons that aren't just about children. And that is difficult too to navigate. There's a lack of supports for that. So it's not, oftentimes it's difficult having this conversation because it should be something everybody cares about. But oftentimes people will say, well, what about me? And my pushback on that is, yeah, what about you? What happens when you need to leave work for 6 weeks to care for a loved one going through cancer treatments? What will you do? How will you navigate that system? Because that is what we're talking about. Yeah. We all have inadequate support in that way when we are employed in this country, unfortunately. And so it's not just about parents, it's about all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that you bring that up. I'd love to backtrack a little bit and talk a little bit about the conversation of childcare and the astronomical costs and how so many people, like, I know when you talk about how much your childcare costs, so many people run to your comments and tell you, just quit your job because that's just crazy. And then you could just watch them. And I would love to know your take on why this is a decision only women are forced to justify, but also, like some of these other double standards of like, who's watching the kids when you're gone, or, standards in the actual care too.
Sure. So there's obviously the childcare conversation is one that is tied to so many things, right? Paid leave and childcare, all these things are so intertwined. Even things like the motherhood penalty at work. There's all these expectations we place on women and double standards that we have. When women have children, they start to get paid less at work. There's a bias against them. And when men have children, there's what they call the fatherhood bonus. They actually start to earn more and get promoted more because they're viewed as a family man. And they're viewed as more dedicated to the work because they quote unquote have to provide for a family. Whereas women are viewed as like a flight risk. They're going to need flexibility. They're going to need sick time, right? There's this double standard, this
Yeah.
expectation that women will slot into this caregiving role. And so this expectation plays into this childcare conversation where people say, well, she's a mother. Of course, if somebody has to leave the workforce to provide full-time childcare, it's going to be her. And so when we talk about the cost of childcare, oftentimes people will say, well, does her salary cover the cost of childcare? And my pushback on that is always, why are we talking about it like that? Do we talk about the mortgage only coming from your paycheck? No. When you get a loan from a mortgage lender, they look at both of your paychecks. And they say, what can this family afford? And that is how we should be looking at the cost of childcare, because childcare is not a woman's issue. It's a family issue. It's a societal issue. It's an economic issue, actually. It's infrastructure. But when we talk about it in the case of our homes and our marriages and our relationships, this is not just an expense that women have to accommodate for. It is a shared family expense. And so it doesn't matter if her salary covers the cost of childcare, because when she leaves the workforce to care for children or is forced out of the workforce to care for children, she's taking a huge financial risk, and it's going to put her at risk for future financial troubles. She is taking a hit on her retirement accounts, Social Security savings, all of those things. She is going to have an incredibly difficult time re-entering the workforce if she ever wants to do so, right? And so it's putting her at this huge disadvantage, even if she's only leaving for a short period of time. Say we're planning for a year or 2 years. But what often is left out of this conversation too is she can leave the workforce for the first 5 years, and when they're in kindergarten, she can go back. But it's actually incredibly difficult to navigate having older children in our current kind of work setup, because school hours are different than work hours. My kids have 35 days off of school this year, not including vacation days or summer break. I only get, between my husband and I, 37 PTO days when I had a full-time job.
Yeah.
So how are families supposed to accommodate for that, right? And so again, can she really re-enter the workforce at that age or not really, right? Probably not. And so it's incredibly frustrating, but I think it really stems from these societal expectations and gender norms that women are better at caregiving than men and ultimately should be responsible and accountable to it. And men have been told their whole lives that their ultimate job is to be a provider and a protector. It's not about providing care. It's about just making sure there's a roof over their head and food on the table. When in reality, most women and children want so much more from their dads and their husbands. They want so much more than that. Like when you talk to somebody about their dad, they're not like, I'm so thankful he paid for everything.
No.
It's like, what will you remember about your parents?
No, you don't want the dad to just be this like stranger that comes home at night every night. Like so many people, that is their experience of like, kind of a stranger, and he's like kind of not that nice all the time. Like, and that's not a reality that so many people want anymore. Because it doesn't have to be that way anymore.
And women are expected to do both. Women are expected to work full-time and be a caregiver full-time, basically, and to do all that domestic labor. And so we're at a point where men are being asked to do more, and that's a really uncomfortable position for them to be in, because they're being asked to kind of break out of what they thought they had to be. And I can acknowledge that that's probably difficult for a lot of them. Doesn't mean they shouldn't do it or do that work, right, to kind of break down those expectations. But I also think there's this narrative. Yeah, we're all doing this work. And there's this narrative, I will jokingly say on the internet, like, hey, dads, you should know the teacher's name. And they're like, why? My wife handles the school stuff. Why do I need to know the teacher's name? And my pushback on that is there's tasks in our home that we can split up based on our time, like we've talked about. Parenting is not something you should be outsourcing. You should know your kid's teacher's name, because that's a person who's taking care of your child all day long.
Bare minimum.
Them.
Know the name.
Yeah. Like, you should know who their doctor is. You should know their best friend's name. You should probably know what size pants they wear, because that shows that you spend time with them and you help them get dressed in the mornings, right? Like you should know these things because you're a parent. And it doesn't matter how much you work or how much money you make. You chose to be a parent. And that's not really something we should be opting out of, right? Or wanting to opt out of. And so that's a part of this conversation too, which is there's the tasks themselves, folding laundry, all that. And then there's the act of being a parent and a partner. And those are two separate things, right? Laundry has nothing to do with my marriage. People want to think it does, but it has nothing to do with my marriage. And it really doesn't have anything to do with parenting. It's just like a symptom of parenting.
Managing a household, basically. Yeah, absolutely. And again, I feel like that's that bigger conversation of just like living very intentionally. And I do, again, sympathize or can empathize with the fact that, like, maybe that's a hard reality, but we've all been sold these realities that now we're realizing aren't. We saw our parents buy houses with just like their one job money. Like, that's not a reality anymore. And we all have to suck it up and figure that out. So we can figure out this whole, being a partner, being a dad, a parent.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, some other double standards I'd love to chat about. One, we kind of talked about a little bit, that leisure time, where you were talking about how your husband had these like 2 hours essentially to himself every day, or similarly, like, okay, I had before we hopped on like 20, 30 minutes. And instead of being like, I'm gonna sit and I'm gonna scroll for a minute, which like I definitely do sometimes. But like, I was like, no, what can I get done in these 20 minutes? I'm getting a meal in the crock pot so I don't have to worry about it later because I don't have time later. And I feel like that is what's constantly going through, especially like a mom's mind. Okay, these 20 minutes are gold. Like, I need to get something off this list. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that double standard, what that looks like so often.
Sure. And this goes back to that conversation about time, right? Who has time? And women do a disproportionate amount of the domestic work and childcare, and men have more time for things like leisure, rest, recreation, hobbies, fitness. They have more time for those things. And there's been studies done on this. I was actually just talking about it today, but women on average have 13% less free time than men. And when it comes to moms and dads tend to have more time for fitness, and women's physical health is suffering. And so it's interesting because I talked about this a little while ago, because there was this dad who started posting day in the life videos on TikTok, and people were going crazy for him. They're like, this is amazing. He's amazing. And in his day in the life videos, he always does an hour-long lunch workout. There's a gym in his office and he goes and works out for an hour. And all I could think is, like, if that were a woman, people would scold her for doing that. And she would probably use that time to run errands, pick up prescriptions, grab dry cleaning, pick up formula for her child at Target, whatever it is, right? She would probably be using that time productively for her family, or she would be working through lunch.
Yeah. Getting out of the office an hour earlier to be able to pick up our kids from school.
Exactly. She'd be working through her lunch so she can leave work early to pick up her daughter and bring her to dance class, something like that, right? That would be the difference. But men have always been entitled to that time. And we believe they're owed that time. But with women, we've been conditioned to believe that I can't take care of myself until everyone else is taken care of. And so part of it is expectations that are placed on us, and this narrative and this mom guilt, right? And people are always like, Paige, what are you talking about? Society doesn't tell us to do this, but it does in so many different ways, even just the comments we see online, right? And the way that we're talked to or about as women versus men, even the harmful idea that like all stay-at-home moms are just like eating lunch with their friends at a restaurant and working out all day, and that they never actually do anything, when we know the majority of stay-at-home moms are actually like folding laundry and picking up kids and cleaning the house, and they don't have time to work out. Yeah, they don't have time to work out. So, these gaps are real. They're not made up. They're not imagined. Oftentimes people say, like, this is just Paige's experience when I share this online. And it's actually not my lived experience, but also there's data to back all of this up. This is real. These gaps in time are real. And I think a lot of this comes down to that kind of those societal expectations and those double standards. When men take time for themselves, nobody bats an eye. When women do, they're often made fun of for it, right? Like the joke about she's always getting her nails done or whatever it might be. Even the idea that women are shopaholics, when we know that women are spending their money on household items mostly. And they're at Target 10 times a week buying diapers and wipes and things like that. And they're not there shopping for themselves. Yeah. God forbid they pick up new shampoo, right? Like, what's a girl to do? So I just think there's a lot of harmful stereotypes and narratives that are really hard for us to kind of break out of when we even look at ourselves. I know I struggle to take time for myself because I have so much mom guilt about what I should be doing with that time. Is this time better spent doing something else? And I have to really push myself hard to say, no, like, you're allowed to take care of yourself.
Also.
Yeah, you're allowed to go to yoga for 1 hour a week. It's not going to hurt anybody.
Yeah. Definitely. I know we had my mom on the podcast last season, and her biggest thing that she wanted to really drill into us was like, moms, put yourself back on the list. Like, no matter what, add yourself to the list. Like, you deserve it. Because she was a stay-at-home mom until we were in high school, and she ended up going back to college and now is a teacher. But she lived that, all the time of just, and my dad was in the Navy, so he was like fully gone a lot too.
Yeah.
Where she's like, I was never on the list. Like, there was never time or space for that. But luckily now we're having these conversations. So hopefully people feel encouraged to do that. No, okay. You actually kind of like brought up another double standard inadvertently with that story, where this dad is posting his day in the life videos, which, like, I'm sure he's a great dad and like, that's awesome. But I hear this complaint from my sister who's a mom, from all my friends who are moms, of like their husband does one thing that like the mom does every day, all day.
Mhm.
And everyone is just like, my God, he is such a good dad. You're so lucky to have him. He's so good.
Yeah.
And they're like, I want to just be grateful, but also I want to kill him now.
Yeah.
Because
There's so
doing
many
this, like,
double
every
standards.
day. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many double standards in the way that we view this work, right? Like women are expected to do it, and when men do it, they've gone above and beyond. It's really that, right? Like it's an expectation.
Yeah.
So there's this expectation that women do it. I was talking yesterday about how my husband makes dinner every single night. And I've talked about this before. And every time I talk about how my husband cooks dinner, people go, well, what could you be doing? What are you doing while he cooks dinner? And I'm like, do you ever ask women where their husband is when they're cooking dinner? No, because you just assume it's her job to cook dinner and it doesn't actually matter to you. He could be working out, he could be sleeping, he could be reading a book. You don't care what he's doing because you expect her to cook dinner. So if he's cooking dinner, he's going above and beyond. And that must mean I'm taking advantage of him in his time, right? And so there's this different narrative. And we often hear, and it's true, that millennial dads are doing 3 times more than their dads did, right? They're doing so much more than their dads did, but they're still doing less diapers than women. They're still feeding their children less than women. They're still getting more sleep than women when they have a newborn baby. They're taking less parental leave than women. They're still doing less than women. So yes, they're doing more than their dads did, but half their dads never even did a diaper, right? And so if
the bar was already in hell.
The bar was very low. Yes. And so the bar for men is very low. What we expect of a good dad is just to be present. Just to be present. And as a good mom, you have to be going above and beyond at all times. And so it's this idea that if I drop my toddler off at daycare and she looks disheveled, her hair is not brushed, she's in a mismatched outfit and she looks crazy, and I forgot her cup, I'm being judged. What is up with her mother? Her mother doesn't even care about her. She couldn't even run a comb through her hair. If my husband did that, people would be like, oh my God, dad duty. Oh, what a good dad, though. At least he got her here on time. And she has her backpack and her lunch, doesn't have her water, but that's okay. Daddy doesn't like know how to do that, right? There's like in every way that we show up as parents, women are held to a different standard. And it's so crazy because it's like, why are we expecting dads to be so bad at this? Why is that okay? Why are we okay with that? That shouldn't be okay. And it's even in everything, men will be like, oh, we take more risks with our kids. Like I'm not afraid to let my kid jump off the top of the playground structure. And I've said to men, I'm like, that's because you're not worried about the repercussions. You're not worried about the judgment you're going to receive, right? Like, oh,
even
that
like
didn't know
the
better.
after that will be required of the mom. Like you're not taking the kid to the doctor.
Yeah. And there's this like idea that like dads are meant for fun and play and moms are meant for structure.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not fair. It's not fair that that's how it is. And it's also not true. Men are very capable of being amazing caregivers.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I feel like there is a lot of pushback, and you see that in politics. You see that in the, trends of like this toxic masculinity and this like really crazy view of it, because they see women pushing back for more, and that we are so capable of so much more, and we don't rely on men for everything now. So we can choose who we want our partners to be and what we want that partnership to look like. And that must be really scary for someone who doesn't want to do anything.
Yeah. And, there's all these harmful narratives out there. And like some of them are based in fact, right? That women initiate 70% of divorce. But why? Why are women doing that? And this idea of like our grandmother stuck it out. It's like your grandmother wasn't allowed to get divorced. That's the difference, right? And women their eyes have been open to the fact that they don't have to live this way anymore, right? And so if they're going to live with a partner, they want it to be beneficial, not just to them, but to the entire family. And I'm really a big advocate for the fact that like this work is so valuable and important, and I want men to want to do it. Like, why wouldn't you want to be a part of your family in this way? Why wouldn't you want to be more involved with your kids and your wife? Why wouldn't you want your wife to be happy and thriving? Because when everybody's working together, everybody's happier. Nobody likes to live in a home where the wife is resentful and angry at her husband, and the husband feels like she's a nag and he's always grouchy. Like,
and no one wants to live like that.
Oh, nobody's having fun like that. So why not try to change it so that way we can all thrive in these relationships? Like, I just think that part of the conversation is missed. It's like modern women have changed for the worse and they've ruined marriage. Or modern women have changed their expectations and modern men refuse to adjust and refuse to acknowledge how important the work that women do is. Because
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it. The unpaid, invisible labor that we talked about is important and it is valuable and it is worthy, and
Yeah.
everybody should participate in it.
Yeah. And that runs so deeply. I mean, I see it in my mom, and I've seen it in these small interactions with like my mother-in-law, them not feeling like they're enough, or like the work that they are doing doesn't matter. And like having
Yeah.
to really remind me, I'm like, you are the lifeblood of this whole operation. You're it.
Yeah.
And you're the reason also why your family keeps coming home as grown adults, because
Yep.
I mean, together, they both had good partners, but still. And I think also as a parent, how could you not look at, the situation as an example for your kids too? Don't you want them to see their dad in the weeds with their mom doing everything? Like, don't you want your kids to know that it's not just the mom's job?
Yeah.
And like, that should be enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like more and more men
Yeah.
understand and want to make these changes. And it's hard. This is hard work because we're like undoing like all of this like conditioning that we've all gone through. It's not like I think the biggest thing I always want people to take away from these conversations is that it's not your fault.
No.
It's not your fault. It's not even necessarily your husband's fault that you ended up here. Like, this is not an individual failure.
Yeah.
As a society, we have conditioned all of us to basically end up in this trap. Like, we've set it up this way between the lack of paid leave and the childcare and the motherhood penalty and the ways that we tell men that they're important versus women. Like, we have created this, not us in particular, but really like our society has created this. So if you've ended up here, it's not because you failed, right?
Yeah.
We fell into the trap because that's how it was designed.
Yeah.
It was designed for it to be like this. And so it's a lot of work to try and kind of dig our ways out of this.
Yeah. But it's really meaningful. And I mean,
Totally.
obviously it's changed your life, but now you're helping other people to make a positive impact on their lives. And that's huge. And I think even if you're not on TikTok sharing your story, you maybe are sharing these stories with your girlfriends or your sister or whoever, and empowering them to have the same conversations and to look at their lives critically. In a good way of, how can we make it better for everybody? And that's huge.
Yeah, I tell everyone, I tell everyone to talk about it. Talk about it. Talk about it to whoever you want. Like, there used to be this old like advice, like, oh, don't talk poorly. Opie, enough. Sorry. It's the holidays. Every 5 minutes, there's a delivery truck in this driveway.
Understand.
Yes, I think there's this idea that like you can't say anything bad about your marriage because then people will judge your husband, for example. But when we're told not to talk about these things or to address them with our friends or our family, we live in isolation and we feel, again, like it's our fault, like it's our own issue to deal with. And so the louder we are, whether it's to our close community of friends or if it's on the internet, the more we talk about these things, the more we can normalize these conversations. And we couldn't realize that there's actually strength in the fact that so many of us relate to this conversation. We are not alone in this conversation. This is not your fault. But when we don't talk about it, it's very easy to be told, hey, girl, you're crazy.
Yeah.
Chill out.
Stop nagging me about the dishwasher.
This is the way it is, right?
Yeah.
And then you'll feel very alone in it and unfulfilled. And so I think if you have a close friend that you feel confident talking to, that is super important. Like having these conversations are really important.
Yeah, there is a lot of power in the exchanging of information.
Totally.
Okay, we only have a couple minutes left, so I'd love to shift the focus a little bit just to you. So since like starting to share on social media, how have your own career aspirations shifted? Any like exciting pinch me moments?
Oh man, I had no intentions with this platform. So like everything that's happened has been really amazing. I think as it's grown, I've been able to connect with so many women and have had such amazing opportunities to not only kind of bring awareness to these issues, but hopefully to truly impact them. I've been able to go to the White House twice this year to do advocacy work and just to share my experience and to lend this platform to amplify messages. And I could not have pictured that 2 years ago when I started posting on TikTok, just a silly little video, right? I had no intentions. And so everything has been such a pleasant surprise. I anticipate next year looking very different than this year. I no longer have a corporate job. I have hopes and dreams of this platform being more than just content, but being a really important platform ultimately, hopefully, for women to kind of be able to advocate for themselves and to see meaningful change in their own lives and to really strive for gender equity and bringing awareness to things like the childcare crisis. I really believe that the content that I've been creating can be kind of a catalyst for change and can be more than just content, even though the content is the core of it, right? I think it can be more than that. I don't know. There's so many different like pinch me moments. It's so funny because like I don't always know what's happening, but somebody like sent me a screenshot. And they're like, "You were on the Today Show today," and I'm like,
You're like, what?
I didn't know." And that's
So
cool,
though.
right? To like have those moments and to know that the things that you're saying have impact on that level. And I'm just like your average mom sharing my experience. But that is the power, right? It's like you can be an average mom and share your experience and it can impact millions of people. And that's really important. And I think that's the pinch me moment, which is that it's starting conversation. It is starting dialogues in homes and it is actually impacting meaningful change for a lot of people. And that is more than I could have hoped for.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it just speaks to how relatable you are and how like real these issues are. So many people feel seen and heard by you. So that's just amazing.
Thank you.
And I know you mentioned the book Fair Play, but any other resources, books, anything else that you would recommend?
I'll just like throw a bunch at you.
Yeah.
I love Fair Play. I like the book Fed Up. I like the book Emotional Labor. I think a book that's written by a man, so sometimes men are a little bit more receptive to it, is This Is How Your Marriage Ends, which is a good book, an interesting book. There's a ton of podcasts you can listen to. Time to Lean is a good podcast. There's a lot of apps that are cool, like Persist or Maple, Coexist. There's all these different apps you can check out that will maybe help you manage some of these things in your home. And obviously, like social media is huge. I know we don't all have time to consume a book. We don't all have time to listen to an entire audiobook, but you can listen to 90 seconds on Instagram. And so I think even if it's not me, I think there's so many people creating content about these things and you can kind of seek that information out. And I think that's really, really impactful as well.
I love it. And then I'll link to it in the show notes, but people can find you at She's a Page Turner on Instagram and at Paige on TikTok.
I am at She's a Page Turner everywhere. So I'm at She's a Page Turner on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and Substack. So I also have a newsletter if you want to follow along. But yeah, you can find me everywhere at She is the Page Turner.
Love it. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.